What makes a place? What makes a country? I'd like to visit Japan someday. What do I expect to find when I get there? Well, presumably, Japanese culture, which didn't evolve out of thin air. It is a product of the Japanese people. It is tied to their identity and their ancestral heritage. They represent the overwhelming majority of the population. I don't expect to see much in the line of diversity. There isn't much in the line of diversity there, but that's okay, because I'm going to Japan, which is the home of Japanese people, and that's precisely why I'm going there, right? To see Japan and its people in their homeland, to be immersed in their culture and way of life, which is recognizably different to my own. So, it's clear that Japanese people exist as a group. Their nation is real and unique. It is comprised of people of the Japanese tribe. If you had the power of Q from Star Trek, and you could just snap your fingers and swap the peoples of Japan and Nigeria around, then Japanese identity and culture would have switched to the landmass of Nigeria and vice versa. The land of Japan would no longer be Japanese anymore, it would be Nigerian, because the people make the place. Ethnic Japanese people represent 98.5% of the population of Japan right now. No one is calling for more diversity in Japan. No one there is actually thinking, diversity is our strength, let's become less homogenous for no reason. Poland is 96.7% ethnic Polish. It is a similar majority figure, obviously. Ireland was once also just as homogenous. Poland has very strong borders. It is resisting globalism and the EU with everything it has, and it pulled out of the UN Migration Pact, unlike Ireland. This is some video footage I found online from YouTube user called Liffybanks. This is Dublin in 1965, when Ireland was about as ethnically homogenous as Japan is today. Not an awful lot of diversity here, as you can see. It's strange. Nowadays, leftists would find the idea of Ireland remaining as Irish as this to be racist and xenophobic or something, but no one in the 1960s thought that Ireland was a racist place. Irish people were just getting on with their lives, being Irish in Ireland, in their country, which they held sovereignty and dominion over. I don't think I can make this clear enough to many of my subscribers who live in countries that have been diverse for a very long period of time. But mass immigration is so new to Ireland. It only really began between 2000 and 2005 and really picked up between 2003 and 2005. Prior to that, Dublin was overwhelmingly comprised of Gaelic Irish people. And so was the rest of Ireland. Look at these streets. Look at this pace of life. Dublin today is completely multicultural, and I would argue fairly soulless. Most of the people who staff hotels, shops, and restaurants are not Irish. The Irish banter, the crack, and the camaraderie is just slowly slipping away. Dublin has lost its character, and it's become a place where people don't feel connected with each other. This is a known result of mass immigration, where different groups of people effectively feel little to no strong affinity for their nation that they reside in. Even the descendants of the indigenous people begin to feel less of a kinship and connection to their homeland because they don't recognize it anymore. As we've seen in other countries in Europe, where mass immigration has taken hold over a much longer period of time, eventually balkanization takes place. Essentially, many nations form inside of the host nation as people choose to self-segregate and live with people who are like them, and those divisions only increase over time. Like any country, Ireland cannot remain Irish if the very thing that makes the country Irish, i.e. the people, are replaced demographically with different ethnic groups of people. Every step away from a homogenous majority is a step towards the country becoming less Irish. Ireland is only 82% Gaelic Irish now and declining rapidly. We are expected to fall below 50% of the population by mid-century, but it could be even sooner now that we've signed up to the UN Migration Pact. So we're on course to become a minority based on current immigration rates, and we're not allowed to talk about this reality, especially now since the pact is expected to make criticism of mass immigration illegal. The Irish people were never consulted on any of this. They were never asked if they wanted their country to no longer be homogenous. They were never asked if they wanted to be demographically replaced in a few decades, and they were never asked about the Migration Pact, and most people haven't got a clue about it. And of course, any resistance to this great replacement is considered racist and xenophobic, despite the fact that it really isn't. Over the past 3 decades, a cultural Marxist agenda has ravaged Irish society. A process of moral inversion has taken place where everything that was once considered good is now bad and vice versa. Everything that we were once in favour of, we're now against. Instead of celebrating truth, we celebrate the lie that gender is fluid, a construct, and that men can be women and vice versa. Instead of celebrating nationalism and patriotism, we celebrate a globalist vision where our nation is nothing but a province of the EU bureaucratic superstate. Instead of celebrating Irishness, we celebrate becoming less Irish, or we prioritise other cultures rather than our own. Instead of putting Ireland first and dealing with our homeless crisis, we prioritise asylum seekers and economic migrants, placing them in direct provision centres at the taxpayer's expense. Instead of celebrating journalistic freedom and integrity, mainstream media publications will fire or simply not hire anyone who isn't in favour of the progressive agenda. Instead of celebrating equality of opportunity and meritocracy, we celebrate equality of outcome and call it equality. Instead of celebrating the importance of the traditional family unit for a child to have a mother and father, we celebrate alternative lifestyles. The child's rights become secondary to who has the right to have a child. This is where the marriage referendum came in, to redefine the family. Instead of encouraging personal accountability and self-reliance, the state now encourages reliance on welfare and social programs, which of course mean higher taxes for everyone. Instead of recognizing the Christian roots of the country, the moral and spiritual origin story of Christian nations being the birth of Christ, the birth of a child being symbolic of the future, of renewal, hope, and tomorrow, instead, the left celebrates murdering the unborn, thus destroying our future. Now, this is a nation that has given up on itself. It's like a sickness. We're racked with nihilism and a neurotic, self-defeating attitude. Nations don't survive if they adopt this way of operating, but as you can clearly see, the process was an attempt to modify the Irish people. That way, you can modify the culture and nation in short order. If all of these agendas had been pushed on us all at once, people would have rejected them outright because it would have taken authoritarianism to enforce them so quickly and completely. But they were gradually implemented bit by bit over a long period of time so that the population were softened up to them and that the youth could be sufficiently indoctrinated in schools. Similarly, if the mass migration had have been pushed all in 1 year, for example, transforming Ireland from being homogenous to diverse and multicultural in a short period of time, people would have seen it for what it was, an invasion, and for what it truly is, ethnic replacement. But if it's done gradually over many years and dressed up with propaganda as important, noble, progressive, and forward-thinking, the populace generally learns to accept it over time, despite the fact that their ancestral claim on their homeland is slowly slipping from their grasp with each passing year. Our political class have sold us out completely, and before too long, hate speech legislation will be drafted to criminalise further resistance and political dissent, but that won't stop true patriotic Irish nationalists from speaking up about what's happening, because there is no choice. I said this before. Someone else isn't going to come along and make this right. It's just us. They are anticipating our fear will drive us to essentially self-censor and to surrender before the end. But it's not the end yet. In a society with a pessimistic view where people don't believe in the future and don't really believe in anything, people always believe it's the end. There's a lot that they can take away from us. The process is well underway, but they can't take away our right to choose. You can be cowed into silence, bullied, deplatformed, demonetized, but what you must never do, what they must never be able to take from you, is your heart and your defiance. If they take those from you, then they truly own you. I know what Irishness is. I know what an Irish Ireland looks like. I was there. I'm old enough to remember life before all of this, before the moral inversion. As long as it can be remembered, as long as it can be passed down, and as long as it lives in the hearts of Irish people, it will not be conquered. However, it must not be consigned to myth and legend. It must physically continue to exist. For that, the Irish people must begin to question everything that they've been told over the past 3 decades. They must not be afraid to rediscover their intellectual curiosity and their heritage. You know, it's kind of funny. I know a lot of Americans who come back to Ireland to rediscover their ancestral roots. They go to graveyards and churches, they look up their descendants and trace back their family tree, looking through records to find a connection to their great-great-great-grandparents or whatever. I think perhaps it's time for Irish people who were born here and live here to do the same, to reconcile with their past, to learn that you are truly part of the ongoing story of Ireland, And that narrative thread has woven its way throughout Irish history, through the lives of your ancestors, stretching back 1,000 years, and it culminates in you sitting here now listening to this video. That story should tell you that you have a unique claim to this land. You inherited Ireland, and it is your responsibility, our responsibility, to save it, to protect it, and to pass it on to our children in the best possible condition. We only have one nation, a small island in the Atlantic Ocean. It's ours, and it's all we have. If we lose this, you will have no homeland to give to your children. They will not inherit a place to call home. The only way for us to know who we are as a people and to know who we must be again is to rediscover the past, our culture, our traditions, and our story, to know how the Irish people lived and what made Ireland unmistakably identifiable and immediately recognisable as Irish. Because that is what makes a country what it is: the people.